I'm David Epstein. I'm the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World, and now the new book, Inside the Box, How Constraints Make Us Better.
The dangers of too much freedom.
The idea of having too much freedom would have been crazy for most of human history, where people were born into a role and had very little freedom to decide how their life would go. But starting with kind of the Industrial Revolution, that started to change. And in fact, you can see that the idea of too much freedom starts to show up as a preoccupation among some of the greatest thinkers, basically starting in the late 19th and then into the 20th century, where people like Kierkegaard is writing about the dizziness of freedom, meaning all of a sudden there's all this choice. Religion and rulers are structuring less of our lives, so it's more up to us. Or Erich Fromm writing about the urge to escape from freedom, meaning that we don't feel grounded in a way, and so we often look to be controlled in ways that sometimes can be productive or unproductive. And in the late 19th century, Émile Durkheim decided to do an analysis of suicide. What Durkheim found was that it is actually a sociological phenomenon, that you could see different social trends increasing or decreasing rates of suicide. For example, when a country underwent an economic collapse, suicide increased. Not a huge surprise. But what he also saw was that when a country went through an economic boom, suicide also increased. Anything that unmoored people from their identity anchors, the familiar structures they were used to, led to an increase in suicide. One of the terms Durkheim used was anomie, which means essentially rulelessness. Whenever society was thrown into tumult in a way that removed the normal rules and reciprocal obligations between people and community grounding and meaning, it didn't matter if the economic fortunes were going up or down. If it removed those layers of structure, it caused more people to be anxious and desperate and to take their own lives. And so it was really a completely new way of looking at the phenomenon of suicide as a sociological phenomenon. But it gets at a much bigger issue, which is that the drive for ever-increasing freedom, which seems on its face like it should be an unadulterated good, actually comes with a lot of collateral damage. And we can see that today when the richest and most free parts of the world, the richest and most free areas in world history at that, have these incredible rates of anxiety and depression that you wouldn't expect if more freedom and choice made us healthier and improved our well-being. Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist, he's written several books about human thriving and well-being, and that idea of anomie, again, rulelessness, runs through every one of his books, really. As he told me, it's not healthy for anyone to have access to everything, everywhere, all of the time. We are not equipped to have infinite choice because our brains are comparison engines. And so when there are too many choices, when we are overwhelmed by choice and possibility, we become unable to be happy with our own decisions because we're always comparing, right? It's kind of a classic FOMO that's built into our brains, but it also occurs at a more sociological level. And this gets not just to Jonathan Haidt's work, but also to the political scientist Robert Putnam's work in Bowling Alone. So as Putnam famously noted, your chance of dying in the next year is cut in half if you join a single club, cut in half, because social integration, being grounded by obligations to other people, not having total freedom over your own time, having what's called social control of time in some cases, where you have to be in a certain place at a certain time and have certain reciprocal obligations to other people, is hugely important for well-being. I mean, that's what Putnam raised the alarm about in his book, Bowling Alone, that as people, as the title indicates, as people stop being in bowling clubs and having collective entertainment and collective regular meeting times, this dissolution of these dense networks of reciprocal obligation would have tremendous effects on health, well-being, and longevity. That book came out in 2000, and I would say it looks absolutely prescient in retrospect, where we've become more virtual, we're engaged in what Haidt calls this endless cycle of microdramas populated with a cast of rotating characters, a total lack of social norms, few obligations. We've often hyper-tailored our lives so that they're totally individualized just for ourselves. And that feels like something you would want, but it turns out not to help humans thrive. You can actually go back to the Soviet Union at one time when they tried to change the work week in a certain way to keep factories operating all of the time. And so they gave people different work weeks with 4 days of work and 1 day weekend. So very rarely did two people have the same work week. So it decoupled people's schedules, and it was a social disaster. They had to completely undo it. Now, on the other hand, when there's kind of forced regulation of time, like in Sweden, you can see that in periods when a lot of the country is forced to take time off, essentially, the dispensing of antidepressants plummets, and it's proportional to the portion of the country that has time off. And importantly, it's true even among retired people. So it isn't just about having time for vacation or having time not to work. It's about the collective use, the collective enforcement of using time in a certain way. So we always think we want more choice and more freedom over our own time, but there's a mountain of evidence showing that we actually want to give up some of our autonomy to sync with other people, preferably at a large scale, because it's tremendously important for a hypersocial species like humans to thrive. I think one of the ways that people have responded to this seemingly infinite choice in the modern world is to try to optimize more, or what psychologists call maximize, to make the best of everything and to make the best decisions. And in fact, we can see in research that maximizing behavior, which is the attempt to evaluate tons of options and make the best decision, is actually on the rise. So we know that that's increasing, as is perfectionism is increasing in many parts of the world. But that's actually a problem because maximizing, even though there's like tons of influencers who are showing you all these productivity hacks and how to maximize and how to get everything done, it makes us miserable and it's an illusion. And as Oliver Burkeman would say, they're just trying to help you avoid grappling with your mortality. They give you the illusion that you can actually get everything done if you only have the right system. But in fact, what you have to do is face the fact that you're mortal, you're going to die, and ruthlessly prioritize based on that. And set criteria, as Herbert Simon would have said, for satisficing. What is a good enough solution instead of looking for what is the best? Herbert Simon is the thinker who had the biggest influence on this book of anyone. And he was trained as a political scientist, but he won the highest award in computer science, the Turing Award, because he was a founding father of AI. He won the Lifetime Achievement Award in psychology because he was a founder of cognitive psychology. And then for good measure, he won the Nobel Prize in economics. And he was what I call an incorrigible satisficer. Satisficing is a term that he developed that means picking something that is good enough. So it's in contrast to maximizing, where you try to consider all of the options available and pick the optimal one based on evaluating everything you possibly can. And what Simon showed was that we have finite brains. And so even though classical economic theory says, yes, we evaluate everything about every option and make the optimal choice, we can't actually do that. And when we strive to do it, we end up less happy and less satisfied with our decisions. So instead, what we should do is proactively satisfice, set criteria for what's good enough, and then go with that. And Simon did this everywhere. He had the same few sets of clothes he wore, same breakfast. He had simple decision rules that he used for things. You could almost accuse him of having low expectations if not for his trophy case, which has the highest awards in economics, psychology, and computer science. What we want to do is get a system that works well enough, think of criteria ahead of time for decisions that are good enough, and then take those. Because you can't realistically optimize or maximize anyway. We can't grapple with infinite choice, and it just makes us miserable. So I don't want to tell you not to be ambitious, because that's what it sounds like. But you should start setting criteria for good enough solutions. It's not about having low standards. It's about having any standards at all that can possibly be met, and it will make you a happier, more satisfied person and lead you to prioritize in the realization that you simply can't get everything done, and what you actually need to do is start cutting stuff out so you can prioritize.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.